you ready to permanently fuse leadership and philosophy? Then a word of caution. You are about to enter the fully abstract yet wholly concrete realm of Leadosophy. Our ideas are not always so clear and distinct. To validate this proposition, we welcome the host of Leadosophy, Tim Wood.
And welcome to Leadosophy. What is Leadosophy? You're going to learn that more about Leadosophy on the show over the coming days and weeks, and hopefully months, and maybe even years. I believe that we should follow our passion. I had a gentleman tell me that the other day. You're going to see Darin Gerdes in an interview that I did on Saturday. And this first episode launched because he kind of pushed me towards getting my content out and starting my show. I had been procrastinating for quite some time on starting Leadosophy, the channel, the YouTube channel, and both the podcast. I had an interview with Darin. It turned into an interview. And initially it started out as a Saturday morning Zoom call about leadership. Darin runs a Facebook group, a leadership Facebook group. And he put out a link or put out basically a message on Facebook, wanting to know how many people might be interested in doing a Saturday morning talk on leadership, and mostly about, keeping positivity post-election as leaders. How are we going to do that? What are we going to bring to the table? So long story short, I had the Zoom meeting on Saturday morning this past weekend, Halloween, and it was just Darin and I, and he was asking me about, he knew I wanted to start this show on leadership called Leadosophy. And I told him about a week ago that I wanted to kind of pick his brain because Darin has a YouTube channel and a podcast called the Leadersmith. So Darin started asking me some questions about my show and what I wanted to do. And about 20 minutes into the show, Darin suggests, well, why don't we just use this as your first show? So it ended up turning into a really back and forth, not only about the podcast, but also there was some leadership stuff in there as well, and some basic stuff about Leadosophy. Darin challenged me on Leadosophy, and can I explain that to the public, which is what this channel will turn into. But this first episode is it's really how Leadosophy, the first episode, came to be, with some inspiration and some mentorship from a gentleman, quite frankly, that I didn't really even know. I had talked to him back and forth on Facebook a little bit. I just joined the Facebook group a few weeks ago. And here I went to not even really knowing Darin Gerdes I had this hour-long conversation with him. I think the interview that I post is about 45 minutes or so. And he inspires me to launch my first episode. Granted, this is a couple days after the fact with video editing, stuff like that. But not just about the concept of Leadosophy, but also about leadership and mentorship in general. Leadership is about, one of the things leadership is about, among a million things, is just encouragement. And Darin did that for me the other day, which was really cool to see how that unfolded. And it was just very subtle. I didn't even know it was happening. Darin's encouragement and Darin's inspiration. It was subtle. It was slow nudges, building my confidence, telling me that, you can do this, and it was fun. It was a good Saturday morning. And, I thank Darin. So what you're going to see coming up here is my interview with Darin, basically putting the finding finishes on a first episode of Leadosophy. After this episode, I'm going to try to come back maybe 3 times a week. I want to try to bring Leadosophy, the show. I want to bring it out 3 days a week. Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays is my goal for now. I don't know if that's too much or too little, but we're going to see what happens. So my interview with Darin Gerdes, you're going to see it coming up. I hope you enjoy it. And thanks for watching Leadosophy. Make sure you subscribe. All right, welcome to the Leadosophy podcast. I am happy to have Darin Gerdes. He is a professor and he is the host of the Leadersmith podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me on your show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Darin. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Thanks for setting this up too as well.
I'm thrilled. So I see in the background, Leadosophy.com.
Yeah, that's my website. I started at the tail end of my my graduate program at Gonzaga.
Okay.
One of our final projects was to create like almost like a professional vita,
Mm-hmm.
and then wrap that into our capstone project. So I created the website kind of just to basically almost like a bio of myself going back into the work world. And then I'm kind of furthering the concept as far as Leadosophy, kind of the fusion of leadership and philosophy. Kind of want to make it kind of a staple of what I talk about and what I do. And
so do you run a regular podcast here or something?
I had a podcast about 4 years or 5 years ago. My wife and I had a leadership podcast, and then so she's a lieutenant in the Coast Guard and I'm retired Coast Guard. So time and moving around and just kind of left off with it. So I want to restart. I've got everything pretty much laid out. I want to do both a YouTube and a podcast, kind of the same thing. So
that's what I do with mine. Because it costs me nothing more, zero more, to take this video and put it on YouTube. It takes to take this video and put it on the podcast. So I just use the audio for the podcast, and that just So it cost me nothing. So
yeah. So I know we talked about you said you'd love to talk about it, and I would love to pick your brain one day about kind of lessons you've learned.
This 4 years ago, you probably were just too early.
Yeah, we just did it. We were doing it in the kitchen, and it was called The Semantics of Leadership. I was proud, man. Ended up doing 43 episodes, I think. And it was a way for my wife and I to kind of piggyback off each other's ideas about leadership. Is for her as a female in the military, she's got many different perspectives that I don't have.
Sure.
And we had some really, really good discussions, and it was fun. And it just it was one of those things, if you don't keep doing it, just kind of falls off the way.
I understand. Yeah. So there's no one that's going to tap you on the shoulder and say, sorry, nobody's listening to you. You're done. But at the same time, there's no one telling you have to do it. So that becomes its own problem. Right.
Correct. Yeah.
So while we're waiting, I mean, I don't know if anybody or who else might show up, but so while we're waiting, let's do that brain picking you were talking about. What questions do you have about getting started? I don't remember where we started talking about this.
You asked about what one of our goals for 2020.
Okay.
I think it was a post last week or whatever. You said, what are the one things you want to accomplish in 2020? And I said, I wanted to launch my.
And then I said, hey, well, let's talk about this. Cause
correct.
The reason that I asked that is because I just posted a episode on my podcast that just finished my 100th episode. Here's what I learned.
Congratulations.
I didn't know if it was on the backside of that or if it was somewhere else.
No, I didn't see the post about your 100th. I was just kidding. That was my first question, is how far along are you in the journey, the podcast?
102.
That's awesome.
So, so when I started, it was the very end of the school year. So, I'm a professor, right? And
what do you teach, Darin? What?
I'm a management professor. I built a Master of Arts program in organizational leadership.
Nice.
So mostly everything in the people side of management is the way I describe it to most people. For you, I would describe the courses: org change, org behavior, leadership development, power and influence, servant leadership, fundamentals of leadership. I mean,
sounds like that was my degree at Gonzaga.
I'm sure you're tracking with me when I give those 100%. Titles. So, so tell me what, whatever questions you have that I can be helpful with. So
first of all, how often are you publishing an episode? What's your goal?
When I started, it was just after the end of the semester, and I had free time on my hands because as a professor, it's summer, right? So I published 5 times a week, but I did small episodes, right? And so it was manageable. And I did that because I want to keep bite-sized kind of stuff, because I look at a lot of podcasts that are like an hour. I'm like,
it's a long time.
I want to finish what I started, but I don't have that kind of time. So, I try to keep it to, 15 to 20 minutes. Some are 10, some are 30, but I'm aiming for somewhere in that range. And so 5 times a week all summer, Monday through Friday, was fine. And then when I got to the major semester again, I scaled back to 3. And I have kind of a scammy episode called Twitter Tuesday, where I just go out on Twitter and find leadership-ishy things, and then I just talk about them.
That's
and
awesome.
So it doesn't take a lot, and people really like it. And it's really interesting. I mean, some of the things that I found, it's kind of an interesting. So really, it's 2 episodes that I have to work at, and 1 that I just am rambling about things that I find interesting on Twitter.
Yeah. No, that's awesome.
Yeah, but those are ones that people keep telling me that they like. So, okay, who knew?
Yeah. The ones that you said, the ones that you work at, are you, when you go into that, when you think about the episode that you want to are you researching?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I'm constantly scanning anywhere. So there's tremendous energy with what I do. So I'm reading Inc. and Forbes and Entrepreneur and these kind of things anyway. But when I find a really good one, I then bear down into that article to unpack it, to see what I can spend some time with, or if I'm outlining what I want to say because it has nothing to do with any article, I just have something that I want to communicate. So those will take more time. An interview is easier. It just, you have to set up whoever you're interviewing with.
Sure.
So it takes less time to do the interview, but then you have to coordinate. Now I have 6 kids, and if you hear screaming, that's not a house of horrors here. I know it's Halloween and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's not what's going on. But I have 6 kids, and so I have to work around them, around that schedule. We homeschool too, so that complicates it. Like, they don't go anywhere.
Got a lot going on, man.
Yeah. So that's what I do. So, but it's manageable. And, I know people that do 1 a week, and that's perfectly fine. And, I mean, I don't know that you're going to get much traction if you do more than 1 every other week. But if you do a reasonable schedule where people know where it's coming out, like once a week or, twice a week or whatever it is, and you should be in good shape.
No, that's, I too was thinking about scanning articles, and I subscribe to Harvard Business Review, and there's always really good articles on there too. Let's see, what was the next question?
Yeah. It's funny that you said Harvard Business Review, because I did 2 episodes back to back where I showed a leadership article from, I don't know, Inc. or Forbes or something along those lines. And then the next day I compared it with a Harvard Business Review article, and it just blew it out of the water because, in Inc. and Forbes, it's here are the 5 ways to do whatever. And somebody comes up with it out of their head as opposed to the actual research.
Right.
And so when I choose these articles, I'm very judicious about what I choose.
Sure.
I'm not just putting out, crap articles. It had to have resonated with me for me to talk about it. And so, but there is a significant difference between those 2.
Well, and it's, you talked about the crap article too. Some of those leadership articles, it might be a good way for you as a leadership scholar to unpack those and say, hey, look at all this, man. The research really doesn't say this or show this, you know what I mean? So that's, sometimes you can, I guess, oppose some of those badly written articles, right, with your own knowledge.
So what other questions do you have about how to get going again?
No, I think, one of the, I think, biggest things I'm dealing with is obviously, self-doubt, getting in front of the camera and trying to wax leadership.
Who doesn't?
Yeah, no, it's just one of those things where it's like, okay. Well,
when I created that first episode, I was like, I'm a podcaster. I've not actually done this before.
Right.
But, after a while, you're like, well, yeah, this is I've been doing this. Yeah. So when you get to some proof, then you'll, be used to it again. And you've already done this before. So it's not.
Yeah. Well, and I was just doing audio, though. I wasn't doing the whole video stuff. So, and I like are you using any video editing software?
Yeah. So that's a good question. And I talked about this in that same episode 100 where I was talking about it. So I'm on a Mac. And so on a Mac, you have QuickTime, you have iMovie. I downloaded Audacity for the audio.
Yeah, that's what I use.
And so I record on, as we're doing right now, I record on a Zoom meeting, and then I just download that Zoom meeting. Or if I'm just recording myself, I'll record on QuickTime. put that in iMovie, do whatever editing I need to do, put the front matter, the introduction music, the back matter, the exit music, and then I just ship it out to YouTube and I ship it out to my Podbean, and there we go.
You use Podbean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was trying to figure out what platform to get back on between, you got Podbean, you got Podomatic. I mean, there's so many different ones you can use. You like Podbean, easy to use?
Yeah, I think it works fine. I mean, it's a 6 of this or a half dozen of the other. I mean,
yeah.
How hard is it going to be?
Right. Yeah. What else? I'm trying to think. What are some other questions I have? Have you dove into the live stream at all? Done any live streams?
I've not. It's something that I probably want to do over time, but it's not something I've actually done.
Yeah. So, I'm just thinking about, if I'm doing like a solo episode, not having an interview or something, it might be a way to get some dialogue real time. If you have an article you're discussing, doing some literature review.
Yeah. And sure. But I'm not sure how when you live stream, how people can chime in other than that they type.
It's a chat. Yeah. I think the chat's the only way they can chat.
So yeah, we can do it. I
was just curious if you dove into that area.
No, I haven't. I'd like to, but I've not gotten to that point so far. There's a lot of things that I haven't done. And the fun thing about this is it's like a mini entrepreneurial venture, right? And what I mean by that is that it's an entrepreneurial venture. You learn what you need to learn as you go, and it becomes apparent.
It's tinkering. You're tinkering.
Yeah. So for me, I've learned a lot. So like I have plenty to say. That's not the problem. What I have on the back end is I don't know the tech, right? So I had to learn how, like I said, I was just talking about, QuickTime and iMovie and Audacity, and I had to learn these, right?
Yeah.
And I had to learn, what time people are listening or those kind of things. I still need to learn more about social media. I mean, how to actually project, because I have plenty of episodes, but not everybody. So I recognize I'm an acquired taste. I'm not a Kardashian.
Sure.
So I'm not expecting to have that kind of success, but there are people that want to hear what I have to say. I have to learn how to connect with them. Same thing with everything else. You'll learn those pieces along the way. And so for me, Facebook, live Facebook might be one of those things that I learned sooner than later. Learning how to be more effective in social media, another, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So, you talked about, you're not a Kardashian or whatever. And I think the discussion about leadership in general is not a widely popular, it's not like talking about gossip and stuff like that. You know what I mean?
It's far more useful.
I agree. 100%. And I guess I'm going into this with the mindset, what, if I have a following of 3 loyal people and they really like having the discussions or hearing the discussions,
sure,
that's a win, right?
Sure. And that's what the Facebook group is, right? So I started the podcast in the summer, and then, long before the election, I started thinking, I'm really tired of the anger, the cynicism, the bitterness, everything on my Facebook feed. And I was simultaneously with the podcast and, how do I help the podcast and that kind of thing. I was wrestling with that first thought. And then I came to the second thought. Part of it was I kept reading Proverbs. I'm now on like 60 days of reading the entire book of Proverbs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's a different experience. Yeah. After a couple of days, you start dreaming about it. Right. But 60 days later, I'm like, that's all toxic, that stuff.
Yeah.
And so about a month ago, I created that Facebook forum, and I just said, okay, we're not going to talk politics. Just how do we talk positive stuff about leadership? And in doing that, I just look forward to it. It's not, I've come to Facebook before, like months ago, and been like, I'm not angry enough. Let's see what's on Facebook.
It's like a drug. It's like a drug, man.
Yeah. And at one point, one of the turning points here for me was I looked at it and I went, has anybody ever, and I typed this in, has anybody ever had your mind changed by having an argument on Facebook? No one.
That's a good point.
What am I doing? I mean, I feel good about putting out my position, and but it's not changing.
Everybody has staked their position on social media.
So what's the point? I mean,
Right.
why am I'm literally wasting time doing that. Why don't we have positive discussion about something? And what I found really interesting here is even when we have arguments in that forum, and it's not really an argument, but somebody will say something that seems patently obvious. Let me think of an example. There was one the other day. One of my former students posted something, and I thought, oh yeah, that's the obvious. And then everybody, people would, argue with it. And I'm thinking, why are you arguing with that particular point? Because I'm looking for this. Give me just a second.
Yeah, no worries.
And I think, why are you looking at that particular point? So it was about empowerment or something. I don't remember what it was exactly, but would you rather have this or that? And people read themselves into whatever's going on.
Yeah, were we talking about someone's reading too much into it, or they? Yeah, I think that was the empowerment discussion.
Okay, here's the example. She posted, "Leadership is not wielding authority; it's empowering people." And it's a quote by Becky Broden. Agree or disagree, and why? And people, there were 22 comments on there, and people were just like, "Well, it's not an either or this is incomplete." Or I'm just like, okay, hold on. But the basic gist of this is you have a mental shift from I'm going to tell you this, or I'm going to empower you and help you. And that's really, she's
Right.
correct. I mean, there is a mental shift but it's amazing how people don't understand or don't see things exactly like you do. And you think it's patently obvious.
Yes.
I see that all the time in class. I put something into my syllabus that seems obvious. Right. And they're like, well, I don't understand this. And I don't know. So it takes a refining process. So this has really been useful for me just to refine things.
Yeah.
So the Facebook group has been like that. The podcast has been like that, and having to hear feedback of what people think. So
That's awesome. I think you talk about things that we think may be patently obvious. It's the same in the workplace.
yeah,
From a
absolutely.
leadership perspective, it happens every day. You think something is patently obvious and someone you work with doesn't, and then your conflict happens, and it's like, maybe I could have asked more questions, or whatever.
Yeah. So tell me more about your podcast and what you're hoping to do. Your format. You want to have more interviews or solo, or like I talked about, like about 15% of what I did was interviews. About 15% was current events related to COVID. Another 15%-ish, a little bit less, was current events related to racism and riots and things along those lines. And so I broke down those demographics in episode 100. What do you want to do?
Yeah, so I see it without trying to pin myself into a corner with the way
you don't have to. You can lie to me right now.
Yeah, no, I want to be really transparent. I think initially I want to be kind of open and upfront my first episode or 2 or 3 about kind of my background and where I'm coming from, and maybe unpacking some of my assumptions, why I started Leadosophy and what that means to me. And then I want to dive into, I don't know necessarily current events. I do want to talk about like the article angle, like you're doing. That was one of my first ideas, was to discuss, because there's a lot of YouTubers out there that talk about news, like news articles, and they have it up on the screen. I want to do what, not trying to take away from what you do, but I would like to do something like that too. I have my own ideas about the things I read, and I like to unpack things like that and analyze them so I can understand them better for me. And I want to do that in a public way.
Yeah,
that's
sure.
what I want to do. So that's the first step, I think, is when I want to go.
So what's stopping you from doing it?
I told myself I was going to do it this week, and
Good.
I haven't.
Why don't I give you the video to this and put it out? It's your first episode. Congratulations.
Yeah.
I'm happy to be your first guest.
Yeah, I appreciate that. If you're okay with that, yeah.
I'm fine with that. I mean, we have it.
Yeah.
It's on. You have it on video. You have it on audio. I'll provide it to you.
Yeah, I would like.
Get
I'm
started.
not recording. I don't know if you're recording.
But I'm recording, so no worries.
Perfect. Yeah.
So get started. That's the thing.
I can tell you, Darin, I have done everything this week intentionally procrastinating.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I found that.
And I'm admitting that to you. I'm like,
yeah. I found in college, I remember writing into a paper, like I find like the most important thing, and then I do number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 instead of the most. I don't know what. It's bizarre. but we can't do that. And so
Yeah.
I look back at episode 100 and I was thinking about this. I was like, I'm looking back. I'm very happy. The way I spent my summer, it was actually time consuming, but I'm a better professor now than I was when I started in the beginning of the summer, because I have hundreds of quotes that I end with a quotation for contemplation. That's like part of my shtick, right?
Yeah.
And so I have these in the PowerPoint that I'm popping into my class lectures now. I have, all these articles that I can draw on very quickly because I know what they were because of the ground I covered. So there's all good. I have 100 episodes in the can. Get started.
Right.
Whether it's you or anybody who's listening to your Leadosophy podcast right now.
Yeah.
Get
well, thanks.
Just get started.
I know. And it's that, it's self-doubt, man. It's like, I think they call it imposter bias, right?
Yeah. But you won't have this 10 episodes in.
Yeah, that's true.
Once you get started and get rolling, 10 episodes away, you won't get started. So tell me more about your format, what you're going to be telling everybody. I mean, you might as well be telling people now because this is your first episode. Yeah,
so totally. I talked a little bit about Leadosophy, or the concept of Leadosophy, and
unpack what that means.
So that's a great question. So if you go to leadosophy.com, you see actually within my logo is practice, reflection, and theory, right?
Okay.
I believe leadership comes down to kind of those three concepts. We're practicing leadership. We're reflecting on our leadership, either reflecting inward or reflecting outward.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the theory side, which, you're a leadership scholar, you teach leadership.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole theoretical side, and is there a coherence between our practice of leadership and theory, or is there not a coherence with what we're doing day to day in the world of leadership? Is it working? Is it not working? What's the scholarship say, And I think I'm not saying that every leader has to be an academic in the world of leadership, but you brought up, what was it, yesterday or a couple of days ago on Facebook, someone brought up thought leadership, right?
Yeah, that was me.
That was you. You brought up, what does it mean?
Because I just did an episode on thought leadership and talking about how thought leadership relates differently at the top of the funnel, at the middle of the funnel, and at the bottom of the funnel. You're very broad, and then you're talking about how it actually works in theory, and then you're talking about how your solution works. But if you're a thought leader, that's a whole, so part of what I do is one of my episodes is focused at a small networking marketing group. Not networking marketing, networking group, not right. Amway, but people who get together and network with their own, whatever they're selling, and just help each other. It's called Great Business Networking. It's here in Charleston, the Charleston, South Carolina metro area. And so I'm targeting these small businessmen, trying to help them with these ideas, mostly related to leadership-ishy kinds of things with small business. Okay, so that's what I do. So I do that, and that's where I was talking about thought leadership, because I think about this. If you're a small businessman, you're getting crushed by the pandemic, right? Mercifully, hopefully you're not in restaurants, right? Because if you're in restaurants, that's a brutal business. Tough. If you're in something where it requires high demand of people, like a stadium or a theater, you're getting crushed. But otherwise, you have to adjust. And I'm telling you, if you're like a financial consultant, or the example that I gave here was you're a insurance agent. Okay, so you're an insurance agent, and if you become the thought leader and I gave just arbitrarily flood insurance, and you're speaking on flood insurance, and you're podcasting about flood insurance, and you're the flood insurance guy. Well, guess what? People will pay a premium for you just because you have that expert knowledge. So that's what I was encouraging them towards, as opposed to what most of these insurance agents are doing. Well, I just have a relationship with my people. Well, they all do. Yeah. Everybody has a relationship. You have to go beyond that. If you can become a thought leader because of whatever your expertise. And so look, my podcast does that. I mean, I already you would expect that a professor kind of knows what he's talking about, but it just amplifies the same thing with the podcast or with the Facebook group, because people come and join, and then, I have that platform. I'm not selling anything. I mean, I'm just trying to, maybe I'll monetize somewhere down the line. That's one of the things I need to learn. Right. Yeah. But I'm not selling anything, but that's what thought leadership is. You'll listen more to me than you will the guy next to me, just because I have an established track record. And yeah, that's where that was with thought leadership.
Yeah, that really that thread on the Facebook post really resonated with me, because that to me was the core of Leadosophy. It was deepening our understanding of leadership. You know what I mean? Going as deep as we can to, and it's a, I also say, Leadosophy is about, we co-create the truth, we co-create reality, and we co-create knowledge. We do this together. If we all claim that we have this objective truth, then almost by definition, we say no one else can have it. I have this objective truth. So, and I'm not saying I'm not.
Well, that's only if you want to be consistent with your philosophy.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not at all advocating for strict like subjectivism. I'm not doing that. But I think that sometimes the truth is a little more elusive than we think it is.
Sure.
And in the world of leadership, if we look to kind of co-create, this reality that we share together, I think that's really important, instead of saying, you know what, my reality is the right reality. You know what I mean? Because we all, we always say we're trapped in our own theater of perception. We can't escape it. So we need other people. We need their thoughts. We need their ideas. We need meaningful dialogue.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? To understand different sides and unpack assumptions and all those kind of different things.
Yeah. And nowhere is that more important than when you're talking about the difference in perspective between the leader who sees things one way, who has pressure from above to go get X done, and the followers who are going, why are you doing that? Right. That doesn't make any sense.
Exactly.
So and so that's a great angle to take when you're with what you're doing. I think you'll do great with your show. I would encourage you to just have a particular angle. And like, look, my podcast is called the Leadersmith podcast. Yeah. I don't claim to be the best leader, but I do know how to help you become a better leader. Right. Sure. I end every episode saying, look, I want you to become the kind of leader that you would want to follow. Don't take my line, but that's a good line. Yeah, right. Totally, that's who doesn't want that. Right. Nobody's like, well, I want to follow a good leader, but I want to be a dictator. Right? Like nobody's doing that. They don't do that intentionally, but they act like that accidentally because they're not thinking through the philosophy of leadership, which is why it's so important to listen to your podcast.
Yeah, that's really great. If I can back the Leadosophy train up, the genesis of this was, I was taking it was my undergrad. So a little background, I did 20 years in the Coast Guard, retired as a warrant officer, went back to school at Florida Atlantic at age 38 years old, down in Fort Lauderdale. And my undergrad is in philosophy. Mm-hmm. The very first philosophy class I took was philosophy of mind. Mm-hmm. And unbeknownst to me at the time, it was the hardest class basically in the curriculum, or one of the hardest classes in the curriculum. And I remember it was the first week of class, and I was in a lecture, and I remember thinking there's like scores of philosophy subfields, philosophy of mind, philosophy of art, philosophy of music. I mean, I'm like, why is there no philosophy of leadership? Why is there no subfield of philosophy of leadership? I think it's important enough from a philosophical standpoint. Think about how many times you've been at, I'm sure you do it in your curriculum. People have to write a leadership philosophy, right? It's probably part. Why is there no philosophy of leadership? So just playing around over the next few weeks, I was like, well, let's call it Leadosophy, leadership and philosophy, fuse them together. So that's kind of where this kind of whole thing started. It started like 4 years ago. And
to answer your question, there is a philosophy of leadership, but you don't know that you have it, and it's accidental. Let me give you an example.
Sure.
When I was in high school, I was in Army JROTC, and by my senior year, I was a cadet battalion commander, a cadet lieutenant colonel, and it was kind of cool to walk into a room and have 100 people plus snap to attention just because you're walking in, and but I picked up some bad ideas along the way of what leadership was. I'd be watching MASH at night. Remember MASH?
Yeah.
Right. And I picked up Colonel Potter yelling at people. If you remember Colonel Potter, and he just go off on. That doesn't work. No. That is Hollywood. That doesn't work. I found out after I tried it that I created a lot of damage. Don't do that again.
Yeah.
So there is a philosophy of leadership that people pick up by watching others, but social learning theory, whatever, and then they realize, well, that doesn't work. That hurt. Let's not do that again, or something else should work, or whatever. So, yeah, there's that. So, at any rate, I think you're onto something, because you can really help people develop or design that more more thoroughly or more intentionally. And
Yes.
that'd be a great angle. I'm looking forward to seeing your podcast.
Yeah, you're like, what's the angle? And I feel like right now, like, okay, I'm leaving the, to give obviously a maritime example. I'm leaving port on the East Coast, and my destination is like somewhere in Europe. You know what I mean? Instead of like more narrow, like I'm going to Ireland, I'm going Italy.
That's okay. That's
Yeah.
okay. So if you just bring to the table what you have, it's something that is different that people will benefit from, and just do it.
Yeah.
And again, what's the worst that can happen? After this, listen to my first episode, because I said, what's the worst that can happen? I mean, I talk and, nobody listens. Here's what happened though. My son has started listening to every episode.
That's awesome.
So if I did nothing, if nobody listened, if you weren't impacted, if nobody listening to this was impacted, who cares? My son listened to all the best stuff that I'm putting out for other people, just giving freely. I'm not trying to get anything out of it, sure. Right? I'm just trying to have a greater stamp. That's all. Sure. Right? With the things that I picked up and learned over time. My son started listening to it, made it all worth it.
That's awesome. I think it's a sphere of influence,
Yeah, that's right.
Grows.
But I didn't expect that, but that's what it turned out to be, and great.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny you bring up your son. So my oldest son is 19, just a freshman in college, and he keeps asking me, he's like, "When are you doing your first episode?"
Well, you can call him up and tell him you just finished.
Yeah. So no, I appreciate that. If we can just bring this all back to leadership, obviously you've, from an inspirational standpoint, your word, your ideas, and this has been a mentoring session. So there you go. I mean, it's just, you asked, I don't know what we're going to get out of this in the beginning. I mean, I got a ton out of it. So, I appreciate that, man. It's hard to put yourself out there. It's not easy. So.
Sure. And you're going to do that, and you're going to inspire other people to do that. Look, I had Mike of Mike's Weather Page. I don't know.
That dude's awesome. I follow him on Facebook.
I love Mike every time. So because I live in North Charleston, South Carolina.
Yeah.
We get hurricanes. And when we do, I'm glued to Mike of Mike's.
We lived in Fort Lauderdale. We moved to Washington from Fort Lauderdale. So every time. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had him on there, and I said, look, I mean, I don't actually want to talk about the weather. I want to talk about you. How do you get started doing this? And what we concluded at the very end was, look, Mike, what you did, there are lots of people that they just need to follow whatever that passion is and do it. Okay. Right. So he's got all this notoriety, whether people kind of like hate on him sometimes, and then they get beat up by his followers for hating on him.
Yeah.
Because
he's got a cult following, man. He's got a cult
hundreds
following.
Of thousands of people are glued to that. And he's actually as accurate or more accurate than meteorologists at times.
Yes.
But the thing is, if this is your passion, go follow that passion. I mean, I wouldn't say that if you were wanting to be a prostitute or something, but
totally.
If this is a legitimate passion, helping other people, go follow that passion and go help other people. Some people will hear that message and need what you have, just like what Mike did with Mike's Weather Page. And so it's the same thing. Just do it. And you're doing it already, because we're in episode 1.
That's awesome. Just a quick question on when you when you have guests, do you have a whole do you have a group of guests that you're constantly trying to look to get on your show? I mean, you
yes and
reach
no.
out to them. Will you just reach out to somebody?
Yeah, and I've pretty much everybody who asked has been like, oh yeah, sure, I'd like to do that, except for one person who I just didn't hear back from. I was reaching pretty high with that, but it was a crapshoot, right? Hey, would you be willing to do that? Okay, maybe I'll hear back still, but pretty much everybody's willing to do that. And they're like, oh, a podcast, that's cool. So I wouldn't worry about that.
You're using Zoom mainly for your interviews, right? For your back and forth.
And that's what we do. I don't think it'll be a problem. Just think through your sphere of influence, and it turns out more interesting people than you think you do. Yeah. Like you don't know celebrities necessarily, but some interesting people. I have the next episode that I'll be putting out here is a state representative here in South Carolina, and I have some professors. I have a college president lined up. I have a couple of co-founders of some businesses lined up, and we'll get down to it eventually, but I'm not like in any hurry because it's not all dependent on doing interviews.
Sure.
Right. I can, just like you, I can talk about this article or that article or this idea that's been bothering me. In fact, it's kind of almost like therapeutic because I have this like bee under my bonnet of this idea that I've been gnawing on for some time. And I just, do an entire episode about that thing that I wanted to talk about that was just irritating me. And then, people will tell me like, wow, that was a really good, episode. Well, that's because it was something that I've been thinking about and chewing on and working out and finally just talked about it. So I would just think in terms of, how much you want to interview, how much you want to talk about something that you are passionate about, that you outline, or something that's an article or whatever. And I would always come with their angle of, hey, what does philosophy bring to the table about this to tell us about how to, how what's the literature say or whatever.
Yeah. How are we going to deepen our understanding of what we're talking about today? When you go into a show, if you're just talking about an idea, you're not necessarily using an article. Do you have an outline where you jot down like an outline of kind of flow?
So I'll do it a couple different ways. One is I'll have a couple of questions for a guest. That's one. Or I will have an article that I will highlight. I got like a highlighter. What's the name of the thing? It's called, I'm looking, Hypothesis. Is that the Hypothesis is just an online highlighter. I'll use that to highlight articles. And then I'll just talk right through the article. I'll quote certain sections and I'll say whatever. Or I will outline something ahead of time and then I'll work through that outline and just, here are the things that I've been thinking about.
Just to kind of keep you on track, your points you want to.
But a couple of times I just ranted. Yeah. Just because something was bothering me. I was like, if you're doing this,
sure.
And it's fine. I mean, look, if you don't like that episode, turn it off. Go to the next one.
Yeah, totally. That's awesome. That's great.
So, there's no, it reminds me of Buffett talking about how there's no called strike in investing. No called strike here. Same thing. There's no called strike. I mean, you can take as much time as you want, watch whatever current events are in the news, have a perspective. I'm a pretty conservative guy. I mean, you can tell after a while that's just where I come from. I don't wave that flag as like, this is the conservative leadership, but I just happen to be a conservative guy. And that's the way the world's colored. I'm a Christian. It colors the world, right? You see my perspective come through. Okay. But it's not like, I have a friend who was on his show, Kenny Embry, the Balancing the Christian Life. And I was talking about leadership from a Christian perspective because that was his shtick. Was talking about that. And so I'm talking about, look, how I filter the way I see the world. Okay. But my show is not about that particularly, although my assumptions color the way that I see things. And if you enjoy the way that I see things, hey, even if you don't enjoy the way I see things, even if you're from the other end of the perspective, hopefully you're not so bigoted that you can't learn something from me, because of the perspective that I have. Truth is truth, whether I say it because I agree with some tenet of scripture or just because you saw it in reality. It's still the same truth. Sure. So, you just have to determine where you are and not worry about where the audience is, but just think about where you are and then let the audience be attracted to who you are.
Yeah, I think that's right. Being authentic, being genuine, and let that come through. And then whoever likes it. And if they don't like it,
there'll be some military folks that are attracted to you and some hippie peacenik types that will be like, oh, I don't want to listen to him.
Yeah, right.
You're not going to talk to them anyway.
Yeah, sure.
Right. So,
yeah. If you have Darin, if you have a guest, if you're having a guest on your show, will you send them questions in advance or?
Normally when I invite them, I'll say, hey, this is like what I would like to talk about. These like 3 or 5 things, just so they kind of have an understanding. It
kind of gets anchors there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It makes it easier for them. Yeah. I can answer those questions because there's always kind of a, you never want to get somebody in a gotcha kind of, situation. I'm not trying to do that. This isn't like investigative journalist.
Yeah. Right. No. Yeah. That's what I was wondering. I
just want to talk about leadership-ishy stuff.
Yeah. No, I think that's interesting. You had Mike on, and did you guys ever get into leadership type stuff, or was just kind of more of you were just interested?
With Mike, I was just saying, look, I mean, everything that I talk about is about leadership, and you're a leader in your field. You really are. I mean, it's just it's that simple. That's who you are. Because
did he embrace that? Did he embrace the fact that he was a leader in his field?
Well, he was very humble, and I appreciated the compliment, and was a little sheepish about that because but that's the reality. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people tune into him when there's a hurricane.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have to go back and I'm going to go back. And what's the name of your podcast, Darin?
The Leadersmith podcast.
The Leadersmith. I knew it was on Facebook.
Leadersmith.
Okay. I'm gonna have to check that out. You got a new subscriber, man. I'm gonna subscribe. So
yeah. So you're gonna have success with what you're doing, with the way that you just described it. I'm looking forward to your second, third, fourth, etc. episodes. Vince Lombardi said the only place where success comes before work is in the dictionary. Right. So you just got to put in at that time, and it'll build. Yeah. And before you know it, you'll have if you just think in terms of you're going to have an episode a week, that's not that hard, right? No. Just an episode a week. You already have the first, move on. Sure. And then it'll build over time.
Appreciate that. That's
all right.
Yeah. Thanks for answering all your questions, your advice and mentorship, and I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Yeah. Thanks, Darin. Thanks again for setting this up today as well. Well, that's it for Leadosophy. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you enjoyed the interview with Darin and I. Again, we all have passions. If you have a passion and you're thinking about starting a YouTube channel or a podcast, don't be afraid to jump into the pool in the deep end. Just do it. Only if you can swim, though. Only if you can swim. But that's what I'm doing here. I'm just doing it. And I was really encouraged by Darin. So I hope in the coming days and weeks we can talk more about the concept of Leadosophy. Hope we can learn from one another. Thanks for watching. Remember, Leadosophy is about using the tools of philosophical thought to deepen our understanding of leadership. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks for watching and listening to another episode of Leadosophy. If you liked what you heard today, hit that subscribe button and check out Leadosophy.com and learn more about Tim's ideas on philosophy and leadership. We'll see you next time.